Good evening. You're watching Live with Faye. Thank you for joining us on YouTube. Good evening to our viewers who are kind enough to come in every evening. Now, every evening at 8 o'clock, we do a conversation about matters we believe are of importance in the country. I must accept that these choices are made by myself and my team based on what we think is important. It might not always match with what the rest of the media thinks is important, but this is how we're prioritizing things. Please tell your friends and family who might be interested in conversations where they understand issues better to also subscribe to the channel. For those watching who have not subscribed, there's a little red button that says subscribe on YouTube. You have to click on that button and it will tell you whenever we've uploaded a new video, or if we're going live, it becomes much easier to access the content, and it is completely free. So please do so. While we wait for our audience to come in, we do know, apart from all of the other things going on in the country, Parliament is in session. I think today was the last day of Parliament, and unfortunately, very disappointing photographs emerging from Rajya Sabha with just a handful of people present and many bills being passed with very little discussion. 3 labor code bills were passed in Rajya Sabha today. These bills were passed by Lok Sabha yesterday, and they only need now the president's signature in order to bring them into force, which is invariably always a given. Now, these bills have actually led to a great deal of debate. Here's what the debate is. On one hand, all of the business media that actually covers businesses and stock markets have applauded these bills and these what they're calling labor reforms. They've said that in one, and I must quote, this was said by Mr. Vaidyanathan, who's the faculty director of ISB, who said that these changes will purge the arteries, the clogged arteries of bad cholesterol, and allow business to function. He said this will ease entry and exits for businesses. It's long overdue. It's in sync with what's happening globally. So it's about India catching up, and it will make India more competitive in these times of COVID. So these changes are being called the modernizing of the laws, and it's also being applauded for giving freedom to employers to conduct business. There is another side. The other side is from workers' unions and lawyers and those who work with factory workers' rights, who have said things like this will basically allow employers to fire workers whenever they please. It prevents workers from being able to go on strike. It also, through one particular rule, which basically allows for employers to wait until they reach 300 workers before they bring in and provide a lot of the relief and the measures. It allows a lot of businesses to be outside the purview of giving benefits to their labor. Now, again, for our urban audience, this is of relevance to you as well, because while it might seem like labor laws only apply to those who work in factories, the truth is all of us who are employees of any organization also come under the labor laws. And so when the labor laws are changed, not only, and they do largely apply to factory workers, they also apply to you and me. So here are the changes that have been brought in. The Industrial Relations Code Bill 2020, among other things, restricts the rights of workers to go on strike. Now, this is being looked at as good for business. It's also being looked at as bad for workers. It brings in new rules of layoffs, which is basically, until now, if you had 100 workers and more than that, you had to bring in regulations of how you will lay people off, how you will hire them, what sort of contracts will you give them, what benefits will you give them. That particular cap has been moved to 300. So now only after you reach 300 employees do you have to bring in all of these regulations. And there are, of course, other regulations that have come in: Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2020, and the Code on Social Security. So what we're going to attempt to do in this conversation with our experts is to understand the different points of view and figure out for ourselves how we feel about this bill and make more informed decisions as citizens of this country. Here is my guest list for this evening. Professor Santosh Mehrotra is an economist who also understands and has taught labor law and labor issues in India. Sanjay Ghosh is a labor law advocate. Chandan Kumar is an activist who works with labor law. Specifically, he's part of a group of people called the Working People's Charter that have done a great deal of understanding of these laws that are being brought in. And we also have Mr. Bhaskar Ghosh of the BJP, who's agreed to join us to give us the government's point of view on why these laws are being changed. I just want to point out to our audience that I understand that Mr. Bhaskar Ghosh is in his car and is traveling at this point. So there might be some audio issues, but we're going to try and work with what we have. And I ask you for your patience this evening. All right, let's get started. I would like to start with Professor Mehrotra. Professor, if you could just to begin with, help our audience understand what the major changes are as of today and what their implication will be for people who work in factories or in offices.
Okay. The first major change is that until about 5 years ago, we used to have 45 central government laws, national parliamentary laws related to labor, which were applicable across the country. 10 of them had been repealed by this government, so the number had been brought down to 35, and now those 35 have been merged into 4 codes, or now acts, which is a very good thing, because there is no question about it that having 45 laws or even 35 laws is a nightmare. There is absolutely no question about that. Having said that, we know that of the 4, 1 had already been passed in 2019, and now 3 have been passed in one shot today. But the one which had been passed in 2019 has not been notified. Because it has not been notified, it is not law. So we wonder what is the reason why that is the case. As far as these 3 are concerned, unfortunately, the overwhelming impression about these 3 codes that one comes away with is that they're, unfortunately, I say this with great regret, a scissor and paste job. Because if you have 8 or 9 or 10 laws which are being brought together into 3, in any case, the parliament passing it with practically no members present is one thing, and if they're not notified for some time to come, then that's another thing we'll have to wait to see. Let me, as an opening statement, just stop there and let others come in, and then I'm sure we can get into more nitty-gritty issues, which you, Faye, rightly brought up.
Okay, so let me get opening statements from our other panelists as well. Sanjay Ghosh, we have 2 Mr. Ghoshes on the panel today, so I'll be specific. Sanjay Ghosh is a labor law advocate. I understand that you've taken a great, very close look at these 3 codes/bills that have been brought in, and I also put up on the screen what Rajya Sabha looked like today. There was no opposition present at all because the opposition is boycotting the session. They're protesting outside. And that didn't seem to stop government. This is actually not a current photograph. We will put a current photograph, and they just went on to pass everything. So Sanjay Ghosh, what did you, what is your opinion on the changes? Could you tell us what the major changes are, please?
Well, the major, thank you, Faye. The major change, of course, as you said, is that the threshold has now been raised from 100 to 300, which means that earlier, if an industrial establishment had more than 100 workers, then that industrial establishment required the permission of the government for laying off or retrenching workers or for closing the business. Now that threshold has been raised to 300, which means that any establishment less than 100, 300, can follow whatever they want in matters of hiring and firing. Of course, they have to give the compensation, but no permission of the government will be required. There is no regulation from the government side. So that is a major change that has come. The other important change is, of course, as you know, that these codes, now we have 4 codes, basically are old wine in different bottles, now put in 4 new bottles. So substantively, I would say there have been no changes made. In fact, the professor will also bear out with me many archaic things from the industrial disputes law, like the works committee, etc., arbitration, have all also been continued in this case. Now, mercifully for the workmen, the expansive definition of industry, which the Supreme Court in the Bangalore water supplies had given, which, as you were saying, Faye, people don't understand that even the local panwala, the Tirupati temple, the club, everything is industry. It's not only the factory with the chimney and the furnaces that we think of as industry and covering the law. So that expansive definition of industry has been continued. Of course, there have been baby steps taken. And I would say that in the Social Security Bill, covering the gig workers and the platform workers, like the workers of Uber, Ola, Zomato, Swiggy, etc., is a positive development, and the government has to be complimented for that. Because this was an unregulated territory, and now the government is now taking steps to regulate it.
So
However,
basically, forgive me for interrupting you. This basically means that Ola drivers, that Swiggy delivery boys will also have EPFO. They'll have access to, to regulations about how much leave they get, how many hours they work. Is that what you said?
Well, as I said, Faye, it is baby steps. So what is happening is that for the first time, the law is talking about a registration of these workers. So now these workers will be registered. Second, the law is talking about the government formulating schemes with regard to their insurance, health, pension, maternity, etc. Third, the government is requiring this corpus to be funded by up to 50%, 5% of the total spending of these platforms on their workers by making a 5% contribution to this fund. So this is a first step. As you know, in California, the Californian court directed that Uber drivers be treated as workers. Uber said we will withdraw from California. In London also, the courts have given judgments against Uber. Here, though there is no court judgment, the government itself, through this legislation, is trying to bring about some social security measures for what we call gig workers and platform workers. And you personally, Faye, as a woman's activist, as a woman anchor, would be interested to know that this law has dropped the term workman, and now it is a gender-neutral term, worker. Similarly, the concept of inspector is being tried to be removed, and the concept of facilitator is coming in. The objective being that there was a corruption-ridden Inspector Raj, which was a basic presumption. And now the law wants to move away from that corruption and wants to get the industry to comply. However, I'll have more comments later, but I will end this preliminary comment by this one observation, which is that if the objective of this law was to open up and energize industrial relations and try to ensure that 80% of the workforce, which is an unorganized sector, comes to the organized sector, it has miserably failed, because it has just window dressed the old law, different old laws, in 4 different codes.
So if I were to very unfairly ask you, Sanjay Ghosh, on a scale of 1 to 10, to tell us how you'd rate the moves of the laws that have been brought in, would you say it's an improvement? If it's an improvement for workers, is that closer to 10? Or is it actually detrimental to workers?
See, I don't want the discussion to get too technical, but please understand certain things which have been done in this law are mind-boggling. For example, the labor courts and tribunals, which were by and large functioning well, have now been removed, and they have provided for something called an industrial tribunal, which will now have retired babus as members along with judges. Now, we have seen that this tribunalization has failed bitterly in Central Administrative Tribunal, other tribunals created by government. This just becomes a retirement chamber for babus. The babus also, who are retired, do not have absolute idea of how laws function, how courts function, how evidence is recorded. Now they are providing for this over here. Now, however, certain things like, for example, trade union disputes, which earlier there was no forum, they are providing for a mechanism for trade union disputes. Also with regard to different trade unions fighting with each other as to who is the majority union, they are providing a mechanism for that to be decided. So therefore, I would be an optimistic 6 if I have to give in a scale of 1 to 10.
That's actually very good. And also, I read that one of the problems is that these new industrial tribunals, there aren't enough of them being mandated in various states, and that might lead to longer waits and more backlog. Interesting
Also,
question
I'm
as
sorry
we
to
go
interrupt.
to.
Also, it'll take a lot of time if we are thinking that one of the reasons why the professor was asking why the wage code was not operationalized is because they were waiting for these codes to come in so that they would have the same adjudicatory forum. But you can imagine the logistical nightmare now all over India to create these tribunals. So I don't see these laws being operationalized in a hurry.
Very soon. Okay. Good question coming in from one of our viewers, Bharat Raval. As we go to Chandan Kumar, who says, if the laws are good, then why is the opposition not discussing them? Why is the opposition, I'm quoting him, saying doing drama? Chandan Kumar, I want to understand from you. And just to recap of what was said, both of our guests so far who have spoken, Professor Mehrotra and Mr. Sanjay Ghosh, have said that there are good things and bad things about these laws. My concern personally as a citizen is that there wasn't enough discussion in Rajya Sabha about, there wasn't any discussion actually. And I would have liked to see that, that part of our democracy function. But I want to understand from you and from the Working People's Charter, do you see this as a good thing as well?
Thanks, Faye. I mean, you have been very, very consistent to talking about the labor law reform. And I really, really congratulate you and team for doing so. I think I straight away, go what happened in Parliament today and day before yesterday is, I don't have any words to talk about that. I think I definitely feel I was speaking to some of my friends and colleagues and said that whenever these MPs are going to come back to their constituencies, how many of us is going to ask him कि आप parliament में थे कि नहीं बैठे, आपने बात किया कि नहीं हमारे बारे में? If we are not going to ask these difficult questions to our, the representative, I don't think so that we also have any accountability to ask this question. Having said that, I think what happened in Parliament is absolutely bizarre, and I want to begin by saying, that what this government, what Modi government is trying to do, the kind of provision, the kind of, the legal system they're trying to bring in, even the British system, the draconian British system also rejected. I want to quote the Royal Commission for Labour in 1929. And they rejected the whole idea of the contract labor system. And under these codes, they are going to normalize, they're going to basically institutionalize the contract labor system. So you can understand the quantum of the kind of legislation they're trying to bring in. What British system rejected, now we are accepting and adopting it. That's my point number one. Point number two.
Yes, Chandan?
Already talked about it. See, these labor laws have been there, and I agree with that industrial lobby must be celebrating today. They must be toasting with the wine or maybe champagne or something like that, because they have been really, really tired with so much kind of humongous set of laws. And finally, this government has helped them to integrate all the laws so that it will be very, very kind of simple for them to follow that. And there's nothing there to follow. And I would like to talk about the whole debate of informal workers. I would like to revisit what we have seen in the last 7 and 8 months, the migrant workers, the construction workers, the domestic workers, daily wage workers, the bricklaying workers, all these workers, they have been waiting to be included in this labor law reform. Mind it, Faye, these workers constitute 93% of the total working population of this country. This is not me, it's the government of India data. 93% of the working population. And these workers have been completely out from these labor laws statutory framework. And there has been a hope. The Prime Minister came and gave a hope that these reforms is going to include this huge working population, give them a basic rights, give them the wage rights, give them the social security rights, and etc. And that has stand light today, what happened in the parliament today and tomorrow, today and yesterday. All these reform have absolutely excluded, rejected this 93% of the working population. I want to quote it one. The in occupational safety and the health code, the threshold of the factory has been increased from 10 to 20. This means, this is not me, Professor Mehrotra can confirm that. This means that 99.9% manufacturing sector will be excluded. It means that the OSH code is attempting to exclude the entire manufacturing sector. There will not be any kind of, any safety measures. So I also would like to quote that the safety committee, the basic thing, today in the report, 29,000 workers died in the last 4 months.
So,
In
one
the
second,
accident.
Chandan, I'm going to keep breaking this down so that our audience
yeah.
understands, piece
Yeah,
by piece
yeah.
what you're saying. What you're saying
Sure,
is
sure.
that one regulation that we talked about, which is in the Industrial Relations Code, which is the standing orders. Now, and correct me if I'm wrong, standing orders are, are basically a booklet, which is how organizations deal with their workers. Number of leaves that they get, how much, how careful, what sort of health benefits, what insurance they get, whether they get maternity leave, whether they get Sunday off, whether they get overtime, how they're able to fire and hire them, right? Now, this needs to be written and submitted as soon as you cross 100 employees. The government has now changed that to 300 employees. So you're saying it will bring a large number of people out of the purview of all of these measures. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Over 90% of these establishments will be excluded. Again, with the safety committee, there's no safety committee will be formulated or formed, which will ensure what you talked about, the crutches, drinking water, basic toilets, all these things, the basic measures of the work site. And the most important thing, the social security bill I would like to talk about, then we can, move forward with the debate. The social security has been a big political question. Professor Mehrotra has been working for so long. There's an entire workforce. Let me remind you a very important two facts. When the labor law exemption, the exemption is, started giving to this big company, the first government, and please correct me, any of the panelists, the first government, the SM Krishna in Karnataka, when the IT industry came in 2002, and they said it's completely free hand. You have a free hand, you don't need to, comply on these labor laws. It started with the Congress regime. Now the same thing, if you read the definition in the Industrial Relation Code, simply by the notification, government can say that this industry XYZ is exempted. It means that any industry will not be supposed to comply on any of these codes. So, kind of give free hand to the establishment.
Okay. So, and I'll come back.
Point.
I'll come back because I want to be able to give. Okay. All right. Very quickly.
Just last point.
Very quickly.
The Social Security Code, it has been a big quest of the informal workers to access the basic social security. The women workers, the maternity, the contract workers, the EPFO, the ESIC, all the basic laws, which talks about the social security. Look at the threshold. The threshold 10 to 20, 5 to 10, Interstate Migrant Workmen's Act. We have seen what happened in the, during the COVID time. Look at the way threshold has been increased. Entire informal workforce have been excluded and completely kept out.
So basically what you're saying is in an attempt to make it easier to do business, the government has left a large number, by large number you mean 99% of the workers in our country, out of the purview of these laws, thereby making it easier for businesses to run. Now, coming back to your SM Krishna argument, and while I bring in Mr. Bhaskar Ghosh of the BJP, one could also argue that the IT industry in Bangalore thrived when SM Krishna took away all of these laws and said, do as you please. Now, also the employees of the IT industry also thrived. They aren't right now, but they thrived for 20 years. There's been a great deal of applauding, like I said, from the business community that says it makes it easier to start businesses. It makes it easier to run businesses. We don't have to be worried about trade union politics. We don't have to be worried about stoppage of work. Costs of actually employing people come down. And this will make India more competitive, thereby make more money, thereby revive the economy faster. And that's an argument that I want to bring to the whole panel. But first, I'll start with Mr. Bhaskar Ghosh. Mr. Ghosh, you heard the arguments of everybody else. Could you tell us what the thinking of the government was in bringing about these rules? Okay. I think we've lost Bhaskar Ghosh because, like I said, he's traveling. But I'll take the same question to Professor Mehrotra. Professor Mehrotra, can it be argued that the easing of these rules will lead to better business, which will lead to a stronger economy?
No.
No? Okay.
No. Let me explain. Several years ago, the World Bank did an enterprises survey across the country, and enterprise owners were asked, what are your biggest problems? Can you rank your biggest problems? And when the results came in, the ranking was as follows. The biggest problem from the point of view of employers was, one, the availability of electricity. Second, corruption in government. Three, the tax administration. Four, labor law. And fifth, the lack of skills. Now notice what the employers themselves are saying. They are not saying that labor law is the big constraint upon their thriving. There are many other things which are a constraint upon their thriving. They are saying that labor law is a problem, but they are implicitly also saying we've learned and now know what is the way to get around the labor laws. And how are they able to get around the labor laws? So let me say a few things about which are in relation to how they get around it. And by that, I will be also commenting on many of the points made by my previous panelists. You see, in order to implement a law, you need to have a way of inspection or a way of reporting or a way of ensuring accountability by both of both employers as well as employees. Now, that is why the inspectors exist. However, in a regime where we've had 45 laws, and even if they were brought down to 4, which are essentially a scissor and paste job, you essentially have for the whole country only 6,000 sanctioned posts for labor inspection across the whole country for 45 laws. Now they might be down to 4. That still doesn't solve the problem, partly because of the 6,000, only 3,000 are in position. 3,000 positions are sanctioned, additional positions are sanctioned, but they are not there. So in other words, who's going to implement? Who's going to monitor? Who is going to ensure accountability? It is next to impossible to ensure accountability in a system where Chandan and Sanjoy rightly pointed out, there are 66 million enterprises. 99% of them are unorganized and or unregistered. So who's going to ensure this to happen? So the bottom line is, it's a good thing that you brought the number of laws down, that you've rationalized, maybe perhaps simplified. We'll have to wait to see, because we still have to read the letter of the law. We still have far too few inspectors, and use whatever number of inspectors you have, you don't have half of them, those posts are not filled. This is point one I wanted to make. Point two, these are general points, 3 general points I want to make before I turn to some of the very specific things. One argument that you just made, and others have often made, and I've heard, is that the IT industry in our country thrived because the labor laws were removed. This is utter rubbish, with all due respect. Utter rubbish. The IT industry thrived because there were half a dozen other things which we should talk about on another day. Half a dozen other things that the government did, which it hasn't done for the manufacturing sector, which is the reason why the manufacturing sector has not thrived. And this pretense that some people have this belief that because the government got out of the way, because the labor laws were removed, therefore everything. No, quite the contrary. The government did a lot of things. So this is point 2. This is general point 2. You know, on the let me come to make 2 main points about the 3 laws. One, the OSH law, meaning the Occupational Health and Safety. It's absolutely critical that the law did not cover most of the informal workers, and it still does not cover. The Occupational Health and Safety does not cover agricultural workers. My God, if you don't cover agricultural workers, there are 206 million of the 466 million workforce. 206 million of the 466 workforce, 44% of our workers. You're not covering them in occupational health and safety. Second, most of the small enterprises, MS enterprises, not MSME, the mediums are sort of covered, are not covered. The migrant workers are not exactly covered under OSH. This is main point about OSH. About social security, I'm sorry to say I haven't seen the latest version of it. The last version I saw, on which I gave detailed comments to the Standing Committee on Parliament, they actually incorporated in the Standing Committee's report 19 of my comments. I don't know what part of that has been incorporated, because the code that has been passed today, it's so far still not in the public domain. So I don't know. But that draft was so appalling. It was a worse draft than the previous two drafts that we had looked at.
So one second, on that point, sorry to interrupt you, forgive me. I have a question from one of our viewers. Palash Agarwal says, I'm a gig/contract worker. Will I get PF? Will I be included?
I don't know. But this is going to be my next point, which is a general point, which is that for everything the government says, we will devise schemes. Now, the government will devise schemes as and when it pleases, as and when it might have money. Now, the foundational point I need all your viewers to understand that social security systems in the rest of the world work when they are not scheme-based, because schemes can be devised by government and scrapped by government. They have to be mandatory, A, and they have to be statutory, in other words, by law. If in the law itself you say hum scheme banayenge, तो how different is this regime from the previous regime? तो 2008 के एक्ट में भी वही लिखा था कि हम स्कीम बनाएंगे, तो कितनी स्कीम बन गई पिछले 12 साल में? You have to ask yourself that question. And honestly, on the last point, because I don't want to monopolize, I know there are other speakers. The last point is, there is a myopia in respect of social security, in respect of informal workers and unorganized workers in this country, which is almost surreal, because it is going to prove catastrophic for the future of our nation for generations to come. Let me explain what I mean. We are already 2/3 of the way through our demographic dividend. We keep calling ourselves a young country. The fact of the matter is that in 16 years, we will become an aging society. Today, only 8% of our total population is over 60. By 2036, our own government's projections, most recently, made public a month ago, say that by 2036, 15% of our population will be aging. In other words, they will be over 60. They all need social security, but 91% of our workforce is without social security. Are you making a provision in this law? You don't change laws every now and then. You make a law because you're doing this for the first time in the 21st century. And you have only 15, 16, at most 20 years left for your demographic dividend. We will become an aging society. And we will be millions of workers without social security if we go by the scheme-based method. So I had recommended very strongly those suggestions were in the Standing Committee report. I don't know what has been incorporated. We don't know.
Right. Yes.
Faye, can I just make a small point? Can I just make a small point?
Also to just tell our audience, we're losing Bhaskar Ghosh a lot because he's on the road, and that's the reason why he's going in and out, and we haven't been able to work him into the conversation. Just to read a couple of responses coming in from our viewers. Ravi Kiran Jayanti says, is the Congress response as responsible as the BJP for the bills passed today? This reminded me of the purification of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, which took place in Parliament during the UPA. Bharat Raval says, thank you for the constant vigilance on this point. Chinmay Mukhopadhyay says, keep up the good work. Thank you, Chinmay, for your support. Going back to Chandan Kumar, go ahead.
My response, Bhaskar is there. If you want, ask him to reply, then I can wait. Otherwise, again, we will lose him. Do you want to go with him?
Do we have him?
Yeah, go with Bhaskar ji.
Yes.
Yeah, please go with
Mr. Ghosh. Mr. Bhaskar Ghosh, go ahead.
I can't hear much, so I don't know what my other panelist has really told on your technical notes.
Mr. Ghosh, I
And
need
they
you to
have got,
just
yeah.
flip your
Please,
camera
can
a
you brief
second,
me?
if
Yeah.
you don't mind. Yes. Okay. Yes. Go ahead.
This is okay, right?
So
So I'm
I'll give you
sorry,
a
I'm
quick
yeah,
brief,
yeah,
if you
yeah.
can hear me. So the arguments so far have been that there are a couple of things that have been brought in that are good: the simplification, the reducing of the number of laws, the fact that gig workers are being considered for social security, although we don't know the details of that, nomenclature of workers and inspectors and things like that. But the large pain point has been that many workers will be left out of the purview of these laws, that it gives organizations or companies or corporates carte blanche, sort of an blank check to do what they please until they reach 300 workers, and that there isn't any transparency as to what the government has passed. We don't know what this bill looks like. It's not in the public domain, apart from many of the smaller things. But go ahead, Mr. Ghosh.
No, all the bills are in the public domain, Faye. All the bills are in the
Okay.
public domain, and we
Okay.
read it clause by clause.
Okay.
See,
All right,
as
Mr.
because
Ghosh.
because I'm not representing as a technical experts and the labor law experts. I'm representing from a political party. So
Yes.
let me also follow the line what today our Honorable Minister Santosh Gangwar has specifically mentioned. They said the government has incorporated 3/4 of the recommendation of a parliamentary standing committee, which scrutinized the codes and the bills on Saturday, Gangwar, and so it was a parliamentary committee which has, and all the stakeholders have discussed at length, and then after this has been inducted, this has been passed in the Rajya Sabha today, and the supporting of the bill is the TDP, JDU, and BJD and YSR. So, what is the objective of that particular, codes is that is to ensure to ensure the occupational safety, health, and the working conditions in industrial relation code and the code of the social security. That is a basic fundamental. And remember that 2019 when we came to the power, we always say there's one nation, one law, one nation theory was so. What we are trying to do is to provide an is an level playing field for the different class of industries to function on a very standard platforms. And one of the parameter to function standard platforms in, of course, the labor law simplification, as we have simplified the Income Tax Act, GST, and similarly the very
Mm-hmm.
complicated labor laws, which was very I think certainly exploited and misutilized by these so-called the Inspector Raj. So our objective is to finish the Inspector Raj to derail the harassment of different class of people and to bring about 50 crore of workers. I don't know why you're saying that it is a lot of people have been left out. 50 crores of the workers, both organized and unorganized sectors, have been included in this particular labor laws, where the safety and security and the working conditions is the primary objectives. So on one side, it is not the government only decided, cabinet is not decided. It is all the stakeholders, and it was discussed at length in the standing committee. So why there could be a lot of flaws to start with, but our intention or our governance intention of the governance is very clear, to provide a simplified law so that people cannot exploit it, it cannot be misutilized, or it
Mm-hmm.
cannot be an instrument for harassment. Number two, ease of doing business, to provide the support to the ease of doing business of the business promoters, because in this country, most of the business is run by the private entrepreneurs. Number three, at the same time, take care of those unorganized sectors. You see, this time the migrant laborers and all, how they have suffered. So now we are coming up with the one after another laws in different states as well as from center to give them the protection of their working
Mr.
condition
Ghosh,
health. So
in
that
fact,
is
this
overall
1 second,
the
forgive me for
objective of this.
so a couple of points. You did say 50 crore workers, you said, would be covered by this.
Yeah, that
And
was quote unquote. I'm quoted today's in Times that was in front of me. replying to the debate. It is a quote unquote the debate which has taken place, and it was mentioned by the Honorable
Okay.
Minister that 50 crores of
Okay.
workers have been included.
And
It is not my statement. It is a statement which has been
to
stated
remedy
in the Rajya Sabha.
in Rajya Sabha. All right. And to remedy what you said about, let's take a look at the migrant workers and the plight that they have suffered. This is to solve that problem. I still haven't seen how this will solve that problem, because a lot of them were working in small
See,
factories,
for the migrant
spaces where
labor,
they were not
for
being
the
given
migrant
rights.
workers,
Yes.
yeah, I'm telling you, for the migrant workers now, there's a labor card. A lot of states like UP and all, they have a labor cards, migrant labor cards, and they have given insurance. They are giving a lot of protections for the migrant laborers who goes to other states, and especially they were giving one nation, one ration card, so that they should be getting advantage of their ration while they're working in other states. So these are the radical changes that we have done for the migrant laborers, and now when we're talking about institutionalized reform, our long pending objectives and promises was there, even to simplify the labor laws and to cover as many as organized and unorganized sector laborers under this category.
Fair enough. Mr. Ghosh, just to respond to what you said, you're pointing out to something the Uttar Pradesh government has announced and not really brought into action. Also, giving
Is
people
inaudible, yeah.
ration and insurance is not really, has nothing to do with labor law. This is a government service that is outside. Even if I don't
No, I'm
work in
talking
a
about
factory, I
migrant
still
laborers.
get
I'm talking
ration.
about the.
Even so.
I'm talking about the migrant laborers, as you mentioned. I'm
Yes,
talking about the
that's
migrant
true,
laborers.
but it has nothing.
But
It has
this
nothing
labor
to
law,
do
I'm
with labor law.
restricting my debate with this
Okay.
labor codes.
All right. So then, but very
No.
quick,
I'm
quick
giving
question.
example.
But
I'm giving
okay,
example, and
okay, it's
today
an
we are
example
restricted to
of
the labor
things that
codes.
could be done. Okay. One last question to you, sir, before I bring in the rest of the panel, and
How
I
our
know they want
government
to
is
respond.
sensitive and working for the people.
Yes. Do you? But the government also said that you had no data on the migrant laborers and how many of them had suffered and how many of them had died. So how will you remedy this if you don't even know how many there are and what happened to them? How are you sensitive?
Again, I'll answer you. I am telling you, recently, Mr. Yogi Adityanath of CM of UP has started mapping of the migrant laborers, and there's those mapping includes their spotting of those, because once this kind of pandemic happens and because of these migrant laborers are facing very unique kind of problems. Now they have started in Madhya Pradesh, they have started in UP also, the mapping of the migrant labor, which includes the spotting them and counting their numbers. So it is not that we have not started. Pandemic is still on, but within 2-3 months' time, we have taken this kind of fundamental
So you are saying
decisions
you are saying
to
that
root
Yogi
out
Adityanath, you're saying Mr.
their
Adityanath,
problems as fast as
okay.
possible.
You're saying that the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, Mr. Adityanath, is particularly sensitive, but then, that
The
doesn't
highest
extend then
number
to
of
the
migrant
central
labor is
government.
Bihar and UP. Highest,
Yes,
the
but my
highest,
question is to the
because we are in
central
the power
government.
also in those. No, but we are also in power. This is the instruction of the central government. They are doing it. And especially UP and Bihar is the highest number of migrant workforce from UP and Bihar. So in
Okay.
both the
All
states,
right.
we are
I'll
in
take that.
power. So we are doing it as a part of our political decisions and our promise to serve better to this section of the people, of the section of the society.
Does this
I
have
want to
anything
make
to do with the fact that these two states are going into election?
UP election is very far. Bihar is coming
Okay.
election.
Okay, all right. All right, let
UP
me open this
election
up
is
to the
pretty far.
panel. Okay, all
I
right.
just
Fair
want to
enough,
make a
Mr.
small
Ghosh.
point. I just want
Yes.
to make a small point that
Chandan
the
Kumar.
Parliamentary Standing Committee made a 246 recommendation. Minister said on record in the Parliament that we have sort of included, factored in over 173 recommendation, which is a lie. Faye, I have sent it to you a detailed document, which is a comparative analysis about what Parliamentary Standing Committee has. You can show it on the screen also, that what Parliamentary Standing Committee has recommended, what the trade unions have sent a response, and what we have achieved. I think it's a very big lie. Actually, I'm tired of the lying of this government. I don't know what's wrong with this government. Why they lie in the Parliament? Why they lie all the time? Why they lie all the time? I mean, I'm
I
really
just-
sorry, Mr. Bhaskar Ghosh.
Faye,
I want to tell you this
until I study, I'm
thing,
going to
I'm
answer,
really,
but
really
I'm
Okay,
going
tired
to
of this
okay.
liveness.
and make an
I really
official protest
apologize
of
to
the
you for
words
that.
lying. I'm
No,
making
Okay,
an
I'm just
so
official
telling you
one,
because
protest
okay, one
to
second,
the word lying
gentlemen,
used by my
gentlemen.
I
colleagues.
have a evidence.
Okay,
That's
okay,
why I'm
one
saying
second,
that
one second,
I'm
one
really,
second. All
really
right, all
tired.
right. Chandan Kumar, I want you both to stop for a second. I'll remind both of you, we are not on television. So
Yeah,
there is
yeah.
no need, there's an unlimited amount of time on the internet. So there's no
Sorry,
need to talk
sorry,
over each other.
sorry,
It doesn't
sorry.
serve the purpose for my audience. It actually wastes their time.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
let's finish our arguments and then feel free to rebut each other. Chandan, go ahead, finish what you were saying.
No, I'm just saying only thing that the Congress government brought in the law called the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act 2008. The same promises, the self-declaration, the same promises that will give them the social security. Professor Mehrotra has already talked about it. And you have to see there's a two big report of the government of India. In 2002, when the Vajpayee ji was there, he formed the Ravindra Verma Commission report. It's popularly known as the National Commission for Labor Report 2. And then subsequently the Manmohan Singh government in the UPA 1, the Arjun Singh Commission report, which came in 2007. Both the report basically recommended umbrella legislation for the entire informal workforce. And that promise it never made. Congress regime, even in the 6 years, they could implement their own law. And again, this government in the OSH, in the Social Security, just repackaged the same 2008 Act. So the entire workforce is absolutely Bhagwan Bharose. No clarity about registration, no clarity about the social security. The basic thing, the ESIC and the EPF law, the same threshold. For the ESIC is the 10 workers, EPF for the 20 workers. How are you going to include the informal workers? Your intention is to exclude the 99 workforce. Very, very clear, very, very clear. So I'm again saying that I'm not saying I'm making any allegation, but yes, I'm tired of the lie of this government.
Okay, all right. I saw Mr. Sanjay Ghosh's hand go up. Go ahead, Sanjay.
Sorry.
I just wanted to say that Mr. Bhaskar Ghosh, less said about Yogi Adityanath's labor initiatives, the better. He had passed an ordinance suspending all labor laws for 3 years in Uttar Pradesh. It is the wisdom of this government, mercifully, that they have not given consent to that ordinance. So that's number one. Number two, I was going to say what Chandan actually said and what Mr. Mehrotra ji had said, that in 2008, this Unorganized Workers Act came, and do you know that not a single state has framed any scheme to operationalize that act till now? So therefore, to give all, these are all just pious platitudes. And as Mr. Mehrotra has pointed out over here, the kernel of a social security law is to confer the social security, not to sign blank checks saying that in future we will give it when we have the money. That's number one. Number two, let's also be very clear. And again, this is a very important point which Mehrotra ji has made, and I want to emphasize that the world over, and let's be very clear, in places like Australia, New Zealand, the occupational and safety standards are much higher than India. And the same companies working everywhere go there and meekly comply with those standards. So the issue is not with regard to compliance with standards. The issue is to have a system of non-corrupt and fair implementation and strict implementation of those standards. And there again, the government fails to put its money where its mouth should be, because you don't provide for having that labor of facilitators. You're not providing for creation of those posts. So who is going to be there to go and help in ensuring the implementation of these laws? So therefore, as I said, this is old wine. They were kept in 38 bottles. Now you have put them in 4 bottles. And you can say that, yes, we have now simplified the laws. But in practice, and I want to say one very important thing, and I've been saying this for long, there is a one-line solution to all labor problems in India, and no one hears what I'm saying. And that is, make a law directing every employer to give an employment letter to every employee. You do that and you will see the entire problem of labor law will be over in India. Overnight, your unorganized sector will become organized sector. But this simple thing of directing that every employee should be given an employment letter also is not done, is not even heard of.
I appreciate what you're saying, Sanjay Ghosh, but let me point out, as someone who's worked in the media for nearly 16 years, Everyone's given an employment letter, but that doesn't stop them from unceremoniously ejecting them from their jobs when things get tough. That happens very often as well. I actually have a slightly, it's a slightly more macro question for Professor Mehrotra to answer, and it's this. Here's what we're choosing, right? The rights of workers on the ground vis-a-vis business wanting to push forward and start more, run more, generate more income, generate more employment. This is the argument on the other side. So it's trickle down, economics thing. If we allow the rich guys to set up more offices or set up more factories and employ more people, then poor people will get more jobs and they will be pulled out of poverty as well. Does that apply? Or, as we have seen in this lockdown, the rich have gotten richer, the poor have gotten poorer, and that's actually hurt the economy. Because if we count the top 10 richest people in this country, they've actually done fairly well in the last 6 months. The poor have gotten poorer, and that has hurt us. So, macroeconomically, looking at economics, would making the rich richer work? Would trickle down economics work for us?
No, absolutely not. No question about it. In fact, one of the problems I would argue with the policies of both the previous government as well as the current government has been that they seem to have implicitly adopted a trickle-down economics model, and it's certainly not working well enough. It's because at the very least, what it should do is to allow growth to happen at a pace which generates enough jobs, more jobs than the number of entrants into the labor force. Now, at least one can say for the previous government that they were generating 7.5 million new non-agricultural jobs per annum between 2004-5 and 11-12. And between 12 and 18, we were generating only 2.9 million as opposed to 7.5 million per annum. And that's a serious problem. If you don't generate new jobs, you are not going to create wealth at the bottom of the pyramid. So in some ways, all this talk about labor law becomes almost redundant if you are not generating jobs in the first place. But let's bring the discussion back to the labor law, which I think is absolutely critical. Now, Sanjoy is making a very good point when he's saying, make sure that anyone who is in an employer-employee relationship gets an employment letter. Now, what he's implying is, obviously, it applies to where there is an employer-employee relationship. Now, there are two situations where there is an employer-employee relationship. One is the regular worker. The regular workers, meaning who might be getting a monthly or a fortnightly salary. Now, just about 22-23% of our total workforce consists of these regular workers. This includes the sarkari workers, includes the office goers, it includes the private sector, organized sector, etc. But the point is that the remaining workers, 78-77%, are either casual workers or they are self-employed. So self-employed are about sort of 44%, and they don't have an employer-employee relationship. And you want to ensure occupational health and safety for them. You want to ensure social security for them. And the tragedy is that this law doesn't take into account the majority of those, nor the casual workers. The casual workers can't be given a letter. Now, however, this is not to undercut what Sanjay is saying. Please appreciate. For Sanjay's point, absolutely holds for the regular workers. The tragedy is that even the regular workers don't get a letter. This is one thing that I think needs to be clarified. The other thing is that what we need to ensure is that all units, bar none, have to be registered, and registered by one administrative body, whether it is for OSH or for industrial relations or for social security. They must all be registered. And then it becomes easier in a regular worker situation that you will award the letter. I don't want to undermine Sanjay's point. Sanjay's point is extremely important. Because the NSS is giving us data about what a small proportion of all the workers, even regular workers, are. So I think this is the foundational point. Our system is unorganized. In what sense? We need to understand this. It's unorganized in the sense that more than 70% of our 66 million enterprises are not registered anywhere. Point one. And the remaining 29.9% are registered in different acts, including Shops and Establishments Act, Factories Act, Falana Act, Dhamaaka Act, about 10 or 12 of them, but they are all under different acts. So there is no coherent information that the government has. Barely 0.3% of all the 66 million enterprises in our country are organized. Yeah, please try and appreciate this. तो ये लेबर लॉ की बात कहाँ हो रही है? किसके ऊपर अप्लाई कर रहा है भाई? किसके ऊपर अप्लाई कर रहा था और आज कौन सा अप्लाई कर रहा है, कौन सा कल अप्लाई करने जा रहा है? सवाल तो ये है, मोटी बात ये है.
Well, if Bhaskar Ghosh is listening, there's a question from Thomas John. He said, consider a company with 25 employees. They are covered by ESI Act, PF Act, Shops and Establishment Act, Income Tax Act, Companies Act, GST Act. We cut off a limit up to 50 employees would be excluded from most of these. We need a cutoff where somebody up to 50 employees would be excluded from most of these acts if you actually want to spur business. But what this will do, I think Thomas is suggesting, is that it will just make the poor less, less able to argue for their rights. Mr. Bhaskar Ghosh?
Professor Mehrotra has just answered that these are the different act which has been prevailing, and if any institutions or any industrial institutions or service sector, they are enlisted or they are registered with this, they will get the benefit of that particular act. So when we say about registered labor and unregistered labor, definition is still not very clear to me, because if someone is unregistered somewhere else, they're registered somewhere else. So overall, that is why perhaps the Honorable Minister has quoted a 50 crore figure, that at present all the labor laws have been compressed into four labor codes. But all these other acts like EPFO registration, which we have made must, even for the casual worker, if EPFO is must, for enlistment in the shop and establishment act is must. So those are the defining the registered workforce, both skilled, unskilled, and semi-skilled. At the same time, you'll find that we have made a radical change into SME and MSME also, where we have differentiated between the production sector and the service sector. So my colleague was talking about that even service sector is not. Yes, it is entirely covered. Entire service sector is also covered. Only thing that after the bill is passed, I have to go through the detail of the bill to have a detailed questionnaires, which is not because of I'm not available, is traveling now going back. So, but what I feel intention of the government is very clear, that like in the tax net also, our intention is to widen the tax net. Here also our intention is to cover as many as possible organized and unorganized workforce, and give them the social security, health security, working condition securities and all.
Okay. And if I may please ask the panel one more question, and this is perhaps also targeted at Chandan and Professor Mehrotra. Are your arguments, and this is what people will call you, right? Leftist, communist, anti-capitalist. Why can't we hand over the farm sector and the workers to the free market and to the capitalists at the private sector at this point? They will bring in efficiency and they will move us all forward. Professor.
Any enterprise is like a bicycle. It has two wheels. What are you going to do? Are you going to ride the bicycle on one wheel? Yes, some, circus artists can do that. Or if you have, you've got my point.
Yes.
You've got, this is such a bizarrely stupid argument which some people might put out. The point is that if you are not taking, the only asset that an employer or a capitalist has, which is an appreciating asset, is his worker. His machines depreciate. His capital may get him some money sometimes, his finance capital. Sometimes it might actually lose him money. The only asset in the society and for the worker that will appreciate if you invest is your worker. And that's why one should, and the employer should call the worker an appreciating asset. And if you were to look at this situation like that, you wouldn't be thinking of this in an adversarial situation. And let me just say to Bhaskar Da, by the way, I should tell you, Bhaskar Da, all your friends in the BMS are, all your senior management in the BMS are my friends, and they talk to me a lot. I don't know how I've never spoken to you in person. If you send me your email, I'll actually send you a paper of mine, which tells you the following. I cited some numbers. 70% of all enterprises in our country are registered under some act or the other. 30% are not. There are organized sector enterprises which are not, and just being registered, the 30% being registered, koi kisi act mein, koi kisi act mein, koi kisi act mein, is helpful to no one. Because the government cannot keep tab. There is not a hope in hell. So the next thing that you need to do after simplifying the 38 codes into 4 is that you make sure that all enterprises are registered under one act. That means that you have to think much more in a much more nuanced manner than in the manner in which the 4 codes have been evaluated. Because if you do not register them, I guarantee you that all the multiple schemes that you want to start, ki ye kar do, Ujjwala kar do, or free gas de do, or free PM Kisan de do, पैसे नहीं होंगे और पैसे नहीं है सरकार के पास. पैसे सरकार कंगाली पे है, खड़ी है कंगाली की स्थिति में. तो पॉइंट ये है, रजिस्टर करिएगा तो आपका टैक्स बेस बढ़ेगा, और जब टैक्स बेस बढ़ेगा तो आपको जितने लोगों को पैसे देने हैं आप उनको पैसे दे सकते हैं. आप टैक्स ही नहीं बढ़ा पाए. अरे the tax to GDP ratio in the last 6 years has actually fallen, sir. Has fallen. Your direct taxes, you cut corporate taxes from 30% to 25%. Your personal income tax, you cut, you raise the threshold from 2 lakhs, 2.5 lakhs to 5 lakhs. Your direct tax revenues collapse. And now because the economy is collapsing, your GST is collapsing. There is this SS code, etc. You've done it, but you'll have no money to pass do any of the schemes that you're thinking of.
Right. I have one last question I want to place before the panel. Whoever wants to answer it. This one is from Tanvi, one of our viewers. She says, all of these bills and amendments the government is bringing, it basically feels like the government is shrinking its own responsibility and handing it over to corporates. And I give you a brief. Just yesterday, we had P. Sainath talk to us about the agriculture, bills, the farm bills that have been brought in, where he talked about how a lot of the power is being handed over to corporates. Instead of... Yes, go ahead, Sanjoy.
I'm saying in all fairness, we were all warned because this government came on the agenda of minimum government and maximum governance. But unfortunately, the problem is that with all their big ticket ideas like demonetization, GST, farm bill, and now this code, they are very good game changers on paper. But when it comes to implementation, we all know what has happened, and let's pray that this is not a 4th disaster in the line of the other 3 disasters that we have seen.
So you are calling the farm bill a disaster already?
Well, it is very apparent that, when the Prime Minister is talking about the minimum support price, you don't even have a whisper of the minimum support price in the bill. And also the whole premise of the bill is to give economic free play to the farmer and to the corporate. So if you are having an economic free play, where is the question of a minimum support price? They are not there together. They don't mix. They are not compatible. And what is the parity between a farmer and a corporate? And in case of a dispute between the two, with the corporate having the best lawyers on their retainer and the farmer having to depend on poor people, how will they fight? Is this an equal fight?
So Sanjay, is this fundamentally that argument? Does that also apply to what we're talking about today? Because effectively, you have workers who will not have the ability, if you take away their ability to strike, if you take away their ability to unionize, they can't stand up against their employer.
Even without this, Faye, I can tell you I represent hundreds of unions, many of from the state of Haryana. It is now the policy of certain governments ruled by this ruling party to make it so difficult for workers to even get themselves registered as a union. And mind you, registration as a union is a fundamental right to form unions and associations. So that even without this law, it is so difficult for the workmen to even unionize, try to get together and voice their grievances.
This is a question I must ask again, because we're talking about labor laws, right? And we're always told that unions are bad for business, that unions are political, they get politicized, that there are union leaders who basically look after themselves and not the workers. And basically, states where a lot of unionization is allowed, no work happens. I want to understand from the panel, is that true? Because we were also taught historically the Sunday off, the maternity leave, overtime, children not working in factories, workers being treated like human beings with proper air circulation and water and pee breaks. These all came from unionization. So I want to understand from the panel, is unionization a good thing or a bad thing?
See, again, there are unions and there are unions. In 1918, when Mahatma Gandhi helped the textile workers of Ahmedabad to go on strike, and then he went on his first fast unto death, first of his 17 fasts, Mahatma Gandhi was very clear that the workmen should also follow the dharma and satyagraha of ensuring that they don't damage company property, that they behave in an orderly way. They report every day in front of the gate of the factory. So therefore, at the end of the day, let's be very clear, we can make best of laws, but whether it be capital or labor, if we don't have good intentions, if we don't have integrity in dealing with these issues, nothing will happen.
Professor Mehrotra, do you agree that unionization is not a bad thing as long as the intentions are not bad? But isn't that true for everything?
Of course, it goes without saying. No, the trade unions in this country, unfortunately, are so tied to their political masters, so tied that it is tragic. It is truly tragic for the working class of this country, because the concept of the two wheels of the bicycle, in a sense, gets undermined in this process, because political parties are pulling our trade unions in directions which are so unfortunate, and it's too complicated a subject, Faye, for me to pontificate on this. So let's leave it.
Okay, all right. So, but we also have run out of time. I want to thank our panelists for being very kind and answering all of these questions. Remember, we have to continue to talk about this because, like I said, it affects all of us, and it's important. At the end of the day, this country is really standing on people who work in farms and people who work in factories, and people who work in offices. What all of these people have in common is that they're all workers, and these are laws that should look after them and pertain to all of them. So we're gonna keep talking about this. We're gonna keep talking about farmers. I want to remind our viewers that while, yes, Deepika Padukone has been summoned by the NCB on the 25th, which is Friday, almost all the farmers in the country are also going to be protesting on that day. We on this channel will be focusing on the farmers. We'll go out, we'll talk to them, we'll try and bring you as robust a picture of what is going on as we can, because like I keep saying, you have no right to sit down to dinner and eat the food that the farmer has grown if you are not going to be empathetic towards what the farmer is going through. That also still holds for workers who make all of the things that you're using, especially if we want to compete with China. We need to do that not by crushing our workers, but by actually empowering them to build more, to create more, and to manufacture more. That's what we're going to focus on this channel. Like I said, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends and family as well. Professor Mehrotra, I'm always grateful to learn from you. So thank you for giving us your time. Sanjoy Ghosh and Bhaskar Ghosh, thank you for being patient and answering all of our questions. Good night.